Thank you very much, and thank you all for inviting me. I'm a kind of unusual person to be here because I am just a writer. I do not have any titles after my name. I am an American who lives in Maine, and I have spent 48 years studying the Russian people and Russia, and since 1968 have traveled often to both the Soviet Union and to Russia. So I have always called my views my worm's eye view. I have never been high. I have always been close to the ground and close to people. And I've been fortunate to know many Russians, high and low. And I was told once by our State Department, rather disapprovingly, that I was the single American citizen who knew the most Soviet citizens personally. And I am lucky to have 5 godchildren in my favorite city of St. Petersburg. So I am I was of course very honored and privileged to advise President Reagan for 4 years, 1984 to 1988, when relations with Russia took a large step forward. Reagan wanted very much to develop a new relationship, and his dearest hope, which was disappointed at Reykjavik, was to abolish all nuclear weapons. He began talking about that in 1980, again in 1981 and 1982. And in Reykjavik, it's very sad. It failed for a number of reasons. For one word, the word was laboratory. And in fact, it was because of not sufficient trust at the time between the Soviet Union and United States, even though that was coming along. And the other was for many mistakes that the American side made. My position all these years has remained exactly the same. I feel very strongly that the United States and Russia, united, can do a great deal to help the world. And I still feel that way, and I have worked for it as well as I could. So I don't talk from the point of view of government or international think tanks. I talk as one who's just come to know the people of Russia and those of my own country, and I like to speak for them today. I have found that in both countries, are afraid and feeling helpless of being dragged into a war that neither of them want. As the Russians have often said to me, all we want to be is a normal country. The American public also does not want war, and I can attest to this as I have lectured in every state of the Union except for Alaska and Hawaii. And I have often been on television and radio, and I've written quite some books about this, and I do know the attitude of the ordinary American pretty well. And I'm happy to say also quite a bit about the ordinary Russian. And Americans often tell me right now they're pretty curious and a little bit bewildered since they're getting a torrent of negative information from the American media. But they are always anxious to learn and often tell me how much they think that Russians are really quite a lot like us. So one of the things that is not so good in the United States these days is that we are not hearing anything about what is actually happening among the Russian people today, and that no one in the country ever hears about it. My last lecture in Salt Lake City was to say a few things about Russia today that you may not have read in our newspapers. Russia, after all, is a young country now, under 40, and most people know nothing of the Soviet Union, and are also curious. In only 25 years since the fall of communism, which I, as a historian, feel is enormously important, Russia is now, according to an independent European poll, the most God-believing country in Europe. 82% of Russians now believe in God, 2/3 say they are Orthodox. Now, millions of rubles have been and are being spent restoring churches all over the country. I have seen that. 3 monasteries were left under Gorbachev, and now there are some 925. Religion is taught in every school. Traditional holidays are celebrated. Churches, and I was in Russia at Easter this year again, and are full of young people, and children are in Sunday school. Now, that alone is an enormous change. Russians can travel wherever they like and can afford it. All have cell phones, and in every ease in using them. In some ways, they're easier to fix up or call up or get more money on than we can in the United States. The young widely use internet, which is not interfered with, and I can attest they get news from all over the world. Many of my friends followed the U.S. presidential debates and the comedy shows. In mid-May, while I was in St. Petersburg, internet was being installed and extended into 80,000 suburban homes. That's quite a lot, and that's quite a lot about information. It is quite true that the 3 major national networks are controlled by the government, but as one young Russian said to me, yes, that is true, but the important question is who looks at it? And there are many, some say 300, smaller channels. What I notice is how everybody can talk freely about anything they like, criticize the government with no interference. They can see any movie they wish, attend any church as they wish, with no interference. St. Petersburg has restaurants and stores from every nation. Humongous supermarkets, which are so big I get lost in them, and shopping malls are open 24 hours a day, which surprises Americans. And they are overflowing. I actually am a roving reporter, and I walk in every supermarket, large and small. And they were overflowing in the month of May with goods and products. Now, books from all countries are available everywhere. And there is a renewed interest in the past rulers of Imperial Russia. Now, I am one who began going to the Soviet Union and to St. Petersburg in 1968. The whole city was dark. There were virtually no streetlights, no journalists, no foreign consuls, no food. The word to buy had been replaced by the word to obtain. No one would talk on the phone except in monosyllables or be allowed to enter a foreign hotel. So I would say there is no comparison at all today with the Soviet time or thinking. Russia is certainly a country still in transition, but already many years away, and a very different nation from the old Soviet Union. And in many ways, in many different ways, Russians are searching for their lost national identity from which they were rudely severed almost 100 years ago by a European idea, Marxism, and years of totalitarian control. So this is my personal opinion, that's all I'm saying today. It's my own opinion from my own observations. Russia, so for the West, it seems to be, to treat Russia today mostly as if it were still the Soviet Union is a colossal error, completely devoid of logic or reality. What is most wrong about Western policy these days that it is based on a past that no longer exists. I think we should be thinking more of policies based on the present realities, what these may become, and the future possibilities. After all, 10 years from now, Russia is going to be a very different population. Russians have often told me that it would take them 3 generations to throw off the communist regime. They're now halfway through the second, and there's quite a few left. But in 10 short years, Putin, some way or other, probably will be gone, and another Russia will be an entirely new population which is growing up right now and will be there in 10 years, educated in a completely different way. Is it really sound policy, I wonder, to alienate this coming generation now? I don't think so, especially as they're not really alienated right now. Now, there are three strengths of the Russians, which I think we all know. Patience is number one. Endurance is number two. And courage and resourcefulness in times of difficulty. Also, most important, passionate love of their country, which they call the Ruskaya Zemlya, and that's a poetic term. Because of their history, and today, the still enduring memory of World War II, where Russia lost 27 million people, plus 60 million under Stalin, or maybe more. And this, after all, doesn't go away so easily. And there is, in the people, a kind of existential fear, perceived, imagined, real, sometimes unreal. And their long history teaches them that when threatened from an exterior, they usually unite behind their leader. If they could beat the mighty Nazi army while being murdered by Stalin, who was an absolute dictator, a Georgian who hated religion and barely spoke Russian, Putin may be authoritarian, but he's no Stalin. And today, and he is indeed intelligent, well-educated, and well-spoken, and today a devout Orthodox believer. So it's no surprise to me that as the Russians begin to feel threatened by some of the present moves of the West, the majority are united behind Putin today. Coexistence can never be achieved by force. And I may also add personally that putting thousands of soldiers on borders is hardly a good way to begin a constructive conversation. And the costs of war are always higher than those of peace. And in the end, culture is stronger than politics. So, in my view, the sanctions are short-sighted and not a very useful policy, having effect only on the poorest of Russian population. When I was recently in St. Petersburg, every supermarket, large or small, was overflowing with goods and customers. And when one considers the extreme hardships of Russians in the past, these sanctions are mostly the equivalent of mosquito bites. Regime change is a modern term, but it's hardly a new idea. And nobody really likes the idea of foreign people telling you, when they don't know your culture or your language, how you should run your country. After all, it's not a new idea. The Romans tried it very successfully. In our own centuries, the Nazis did. The Soviet Union all tried it. They all failed. And in its most recent incarnation, has brought nothing but death, destruction, and chaos in the Middle East, and left us with the scourge of ISIS. There is no indispensable nation. I don't like that, let us say, title. To me, it's rather an imperial view. And in this shrinking and suffering world of ours, all nations, large or small, have their importance. The will of the people, which is no war, is being affected directly and indirectly by the actions and decisions of governments who are ignoring the will of the majority to satisfy the interests of a few. The shrill Russophobia, rampant in the United States, in my view, is disgraceful, because much of it is absolutely based on even knowledgeable, absolutely, maybe even ignorant stereotypes, and equals in its false content the agitprop of the Soviet Union of days gone by. Force alone is a primitive caveman policy. Today's complicated problems call for something far more different: restraint, knowledge, and understanding. We have today, in my view, only one common enemy, ISIS, and the times cry for us to forget our differences, unite, and work together to end this evil. I've seen a lot of children in Russia, in the United States, everywhere. Our children and our grandchildren are looking to us as grown-ups for guidance and inspiration, and we owe it to them to act with wisdom, like grown-ups. That is my hope as a writer, as an individual, and it's my challenge to you who are policymakers today. Thank you.